Before creating any presentation, you need to first consider the audience, the setting, the demographics of the audience, the message you want to convey, and the time you have available to do so. Ask yourself, who is the audience? Is it executives to whom you're presenting a proposal or an update? Or is it peers or associates who have a want to know the information? Or perhaps it's a team to whom you want to impart some information. Each of these groups is going to have a different purpose for attending, and as such, the information they need to hear is going to be different also. Consider the setting. Is it an auditorium or a conference room? Are you presenting in person or via video or telephone conference? Perhaps it's a webinar or strictly one-way communication, such as what would be given online. The reason for that you need to consider the setting is because the audio-visual requirements and the presentation style that you use will be different for each of these settings. Ask yourself, what are the demographics of the audience? Demographics can really interfere with your ability to communicate. If you have an international audience, realize that certain gestures may be considered rude, language may be a barrier, and jokes likely will not translate. If the audience is multi-generation, realize that certain references may not be recognized, and the media expectations may vary. When it comes to the message, ask yourself, what is it that the audience wants to know? What is it that I want to make sure I communicate? Providing this needs to be the main objective and the purpose for the presentation. Now there might be some divergence. For example, the audience may just want an update, but what you may really want to convey is that you need additional resources. Time management is critical as it bounds the presentation. You need to know how much time is allotted overall so that you can determine how much time to allot for each topic. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a presentation where people are about halfway through, but the time is over and you've got someplace else you need to be. As you create the presentation, you need to always be thinking about how you're going to manage and maintain the audience attention span. For example, there's the 4-second rule for media. That means that about every 4 seconds in a media presentation, something should change. Go watch TV. I guarantee you'll notice it on American TV. The second is the 8-second rule. It's a pretty well studied and known fact that human beings have an attention span of about 8 seconds. Unfortunately, that's about a second shorter than a goldfish, whose attention span is 9 seconds. And then there's the 20-minute rule. This is the 20-minute sustained focus. That means that any presentation you would want to try to fit within about 20 minutes of continuous talking before you change the activity. Perhaps you're going to have them do something or create something, or they're going to have a discussion. Once you know these 5 things, you can start to build a presentation. However, all presentations have 4 basic parts. The introduction, where you tell them what you're going to tell them. The body, where you tell them the information. The conclusion, where you tell them what you told them. And then, of course, the question and answer. Let's look at each of these 4 parts in more detail. The introduction is where you break the ice and make a connection with the audience. Open with an introduction of yourself and perhaps a brief bio if it's needed. Now you're going to move on to the opening statement. Now this can be a provocative series of statements or provocative series of questions, all of which you intend to answer within your presentation. As we mentioned before, be careful with jokes, especially because they may fall flat, and if that happens, you're not off to a very good start. Now state the purpose, which is the main point of the presentation, and the last part of the introduction is you're going to discuss the layout. In other words, what are the series of discussion points that you're going to relay? And you want to define also how you want to handle questions. The body of the presentation is where the bulk of the time is going to be spent. It's where you're going to convey the information. It's designed around your intended objective or the purpose, and of course, it has to consider the audience. Now there's 3 typical designs of the body: categorical, problem solution or cause and effect, and chronological. Categorical is really good for things that can be broken into pieces, such as a project update, where you say, I'm going to give you an update on the scope, the schedule, and the budget, status, issues, and proposed solutions. A problem solution or cause and effect style of a presentation is ideal for delivering a proposal, where you present the problem, perhaps market share is below the given target, and the proposal, we are going to go after this specific demographic using this specific marketing strategy. And then chronological is really good for research presentations. When creating the body, use graphs and pictures as much as possible because, as the saying goes, these are worth 1,000 words. However, they have to be readable. They can't be an eye chart. And two other points are limit the text on each slide to the main points for that particular slide topic, and don't read the slide, rather speak to the slide. And limit yourself to maybe 3 to 5 points per slide. So here's our example of how to present what we just showed. Your slide would show this particular graph, and you say our primary expense is housing at 34%, followed by transportation, food, and other at 16%, made up of a variety of smaller expenses. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to have a breakout for the backup slide, if asked, that shows you what the other is. And that brings us to the conclusion where you're going to tell them what you've just told them by summarizing the main takeaways. When it comes to Q&A, there's two ways of handling it. The first is along the way, and the second is holding him until the end. Executives are always going to want to do along the way because they want to make sure they get the information they need to know before they have to leave. An advantage of along the way is it's very interactive. However, it may be disruptive to the overall message, and it's going to require you to jump forward in the presentation and then jump back to where you were before. Holding the questions until the end works well for peers, large audiences, and teams. It ensures you get to deliver the main message. However, you do need to pay attention to possible attention span problems, and it may require you to skip backwards in the presentation when a question gets asked at the end. In the Q&A, make sure you answer the question, so always start with the answer. Only provide the explanation or the background if asked. If you don't know the answer to a question, don't make it up. Rather say, let me get back to you with that answer. Divert unrelated or inappropriate questions by saying that's not a topic of my research, for example. And lastly, don't let one person dominate the Q&A session. Now, the exception here would be if the person asking the question is the key stakeholder or the key person that you're trying to present to, in which case, of course, they ask as many questions as they want. Now the presentation is ready. However, you need to make sure you practice before you deliver. Think about what questions you might be asked and what your response would be. On the day of the presentation, verify the room is set up and verify the multimedia is working. Don't wait till everybody arrives to do these things. It's a waste of their time. When presenting the presentation, you need to watch the nonverbal communication of not only yourself, but of the audience as well. You also want to watch your verbal communication, and beforehand, you'll want to consider what are you going to do about handouts. First nonverbal don't do is don't stand in front of the screen. Another, don't cross your arms. It makes you look closed-minded or upset. Don't face the screen. And certainly don't overdo the laser pointer. Certainly never display annoyance or anger. Don't slouch because it makes you look bored or tired. And yet at the same time, you don't want to be a statue and just stand there. You want to move around, move your arms, show expression. You need to make sure that you're dressing appropriately for the occasion. For example, if you're presenting to a group of executives, you might want to dress a little differently than my associate Kevin has. So we spent a lot of time talking about the nonverbal communication don'ts, but what about the nonverbal communication do's? Well, appear relaxed, smile, use gestures and move about the stage or move about the room if there's space to do it. Appear friendly, stand or sit up straight, and always face the audience. How might the audience interpret the nonverbal communication that you're presenting? Well, standing up straight exudes confidence and energy. Slump posture shows lack of confidence and no energy. Leaning forward when someone's talking shows that you're open and that you're interested, while leaning back shows you're defensive or not interested. Uncrossing your arms shows that you're willing to listen, while crossed arms show that you're closed and not listening. And always make eye contact because this demonstrates trustworthiness and confidence, while avoiding eye contact makes it appear like you're lying or maybe you're just insecure. Let's talk about that eye contact a little bit more. Many people are very uncomfortable making eye contact, or they question how long they should make eye contact with any one individual. It's best to look at specific but different people, but limit your stare to one person for 3 to 5 seconds, say for example, at the most. If you're extremely uncomfortable with this, try looking just over their heads. Scan the audience to help you see their nonverbal communication, and if you see them on their phones, remember, you've kind of lost them on. And then the third thing here would be call out a specific person to grab attention. What about the verbal communication? Well, the first thing is, you want to watch those. You want to watch the ums. You want to make sure you're projecting. and modulate your projection and the tone of your voice for the space. Use inflection. Don't appear robotic. Don't talk like this. Rather, use pauses to make a point, but at the same time, you don't want to be bubbly. Don't read from the slides, but speak to the slides. Answer questions directly. Don't go into some big dialogue story. Watch your rate of speed. Your rate is going to increase during the presentation automatically because everybody gets a little bit nervous. But at the same time, if you talk too slowly, it comes off as boring and unenthusiastic. And lastly, don't use expletives. In other words, don't curse. What about those handouts? Well, paraphrasing William Shakespeare, to use or not to use. I think he said something like that. Anyway, if you hand them out before, at the start of the presentation, people can use them to take notes and they can follow along, and this is good, especially if it's a large audience. However, people are going to skip ahead, and if allowing for questions along the way may ask you to move ahead, which may allow or cause you to miss an important point. Also, handing them out at the beginning of the presentation, it's going to take a lot of paper. So what if you do it after the presentation? Well, it's not a distraction because they don't have anything to look at. But at the same time, they don't have a reference that they can use during the presentation to take notes on. The good point is they do have a reference after the presentation, and you can, of course, always hand it out as a soft copy. And then what if you don't hand out at all? Well, that's your choice. You'll certainly save a lot of trees. Creating an effective presentation means the first thing you do is you understand the purpose of the presentation. In other words, what's your message and how can it best be delivered? You need to make sure you prepare, tailor your presentation for the setting, the audience, and the allotted time. Make sure your slides are readable and speak to the slides, not from the slides. And the last thing you want to do is practice. You have to watch your verbal and nonverbal communication and make sure you practice answers for those inevitable questions that will arise. If you enjoyed this lesson, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website.